What an exciting event. Didn't know we could get this many people interested in ground reaction forces, so this is pretty exciting. I want to just start by saying thanks to Smart2Move in Gulf, Austria. We do big conferences like this once every 2 years, and these are really hard things to put together, so make sure you thank them for putting on an event like this, because we need more of these, right? Starting out, since I'm kind of starting the conference here, I thought I'd go through the basics of force plates and how we use force plates. So I'm just curious, how many of you have force plates at your facility now that you're using? All right, most of you. All right, perfect. How many of you have force plates, but you're not confident that you're looking at the right stuff on the force plates? Okay, all right, so believe it or not, the first force plates we ever bought were in 2003. I remember buying these, and they were composite plates, which means they weren't made of metal, because back then we used a magnetic field to do 3D, and the metal plates interfered with the magnetic field. So believe it or not, I still have my composite plates. That's the great thing about force plates, is they rarely go bad, right? You can have these things for 20, 30 years. So people always ask me, like, why should I get force plates? Why do I use force plates? I always say this, and I'm just going to start with this really quick. I always say, if you're going to work with a player, before you open your mouth, I like to know what they're doing, I like to know how they're doing it, and I like to know why they're doing it, right? And I think people confuse these all the time, so I just want to take just 2 minutes to go over this real quick. To me, the most important thing is why. Okay, this might sound a little weird, but if somebody comes in and says, hey Greg, I know you're a 3D guy. Here's my kinematic sequence. How many of you know what kinematic sequence is? Okay, I'm telling you, 10 years ago, most people didn't know that. But so if I give you this advanced 3D and I say, here's your kinematic sequence, and people send me their sequences all the time, and they're like, could you tell me, hey, what should I do? My answer is always the same. I don't know what you should do to improve that. You just told me what they're doing. You didn't tell me why they're doing it, right? There's tools that help you tell me what you're doing. There's tools that help me tell you how you're doing it, and there's tools that tell me why you're doing it, right? I think it all turns into the why, because that's what we need to solve, right? The why, to me, is basically 4 things, okay? Number one, and I think most of the instructors here today would back me up on this, to me, number one why would be fundamentals. And when I say fundamentals, how many of you work with professional golfers? Okay, of you guys that work with professional golfers, how much time do you spend on grip, stance, alignment, ball position, posture with your tour players? A little or a lot? I mean, it's almost 98% of what you're working on, right? Because, I just didn't realize my ball position was off. That's a why, right? So I don't underestimate how important the whys are, right? And how important just the basic fundamentals are, right? That's the first why. The second why to me, and this is what we're kind of known for at TPI, is physical. Well, maybe one of the reasons there's not a lot of lateral force is maybe they don't have the ability to do that. It could be a physical issue. A third why would be equipment, right? How frustrating is it you work with a player for 6 months and then you realize, the lie angle was just off? I mean, that's really frustrating, right? I'm always like, you should always make sure that the club fits you and you're not trying to fit the club, right? So that's, of course, a why. And then it's kind of hard to ignore this one. What the player's thinking, right? Maybe they're like, I thought I was supposed to swing like that. I thought I was supposed to put my weight over there. I thought I was supposed to push from over here, right? Maybe the way you learn, what you're thinking. Don't forget the whys, okay? So the first thing is the whys. Now, the second thing I like to know is what. I like to know what they're doing, right? So if I look at the what, I think the most common what would be video, right? You take a video. How many of you use video at your center right now? Hopefully everybody, right? So I want to know what the player's doing. I take a video, right? And I can see where the club is. I can see where their hands are. I can see where the body is. Now, if I want to go into like swing characteristics, I can start to identify, hey, they have a C posture, are they early extending, so you can kind of identify these things. Again, I don't know why. Again, if you send me a swing and say, hey, what should I do for this player? What's my answer to you? I don't know, you just told me what they're doing. I don't know why. It could be their equipment, it could be their body, it could be their mind, it could be all the whys we just talked about, right? Of course, there's launch monitors. Launch monitor tells me what the ball's doing and what the club is doing. More whats. Again, not whys, whats. And then there's 3D motion capture. Now 3D motion capture, I think, kind of blends a little bit into the couple of categories. There could be some Y in here too. There could be some how in here too. But 3D really quantifies the motion, right? So the video camera says you're swaying. The 3D tells me how much you're swaying, right? At TPI, by the way, we have multiple types of 3D systems. The cool thing about our data that we're collecting now is our 3D and force plates are integrated on top of each other, right? So we'll get to why that's important and really getting to some of the science of this a little bit later. And then, of course, the kinematic sequence. Again, you send me a kinematic sequence and you say, Greg, what do you think you should do? I'm going to get back to you and I'm going to say, I don't know. You just told me what you're doing. Don't know why. And then the whole purpose of this conference, right, is the how. Now, let me kind of explain how I think of how. I used to believe, way back in the day, I used to believe that if you saw a player sway, like let's say they sway away from the target, I would say, I could stand up and I'd go, man, okay, I can see you're probably pushing too hard with your left leg and it's making you sway to the right. That's what I used to believe. How many ways are there to sway? You know, I used to think there was one way. Like if you're swaying, I'd stand up and I would just reproduce what you're doing and I go, I can feel what you're feeling. Well, now that's not what I believe. Now I believe there's a million different ways to sway, right? Because once I know how you sway, right, by looking at your ground reaction forces, now I can really step inside your body and feel what you're feeling. So I always say, if you're interested in force plates, why should you be interested in ground reaction forces? If, as an instructor, you want to step inside your player's body and feel what they feel, then you should be interested in ground reaction forces. If you don't care, then don't be interested. Okay? To me, that is so valuable. If I could, imagine if you could just step into Scotty Scheffler's body one time. Would that be cool? That'd be incredible. I can show you Scotty's 3D, right? I can get you his 3D, I can show you his video. I can get you in the exact position at the top of the swing, and I promise you it doesn't feel what he feels. If I show you his force plate, I can get pretty close. That's pretty cool, right? Is that how you think of force plates? Because that's how I think of force. Force plates tells me how the player does it, right? If I want to know how they're moving, I need to look at force plates, right? So to me, like, what's the hype on force plates? Well, that's it, right there. Once you understand this, it's a game changer. It's hard to coach without it, right? People used to ask me, Mark Blackburn and I were doing a podcast, and somebody said to us both, hey, if you could only take one piece of technology with you from this point forward, what would you take? And I think everybody thought I'd say 3D. Both of us looked at each other and at the same time just said, force plates. Like, I want to feel what my players are feeling, right? So that's what I kind of want to show you today, how we do that. How do I step inside the player's body and feel what they're doing? Would that be helpful? Right? Okay, so the force plates kind of tells me what's happening underneath the feet. Now, if you think about it, is the ground creating the force? Well, if it was, it would be called the ground creation force. No, it's the ground reaction force, right? The ground is reacting to something, right? So I want you to know that basically when you push into the ground, what does the ground do? Newton taught us this. This is Newton's third law. If you push into the ground with 100 pounds, the ground pushes back with 100 pounds in an equal and opposite direction, right? So what Newton told us is that, hey, these ground reaction forces are important for movement, right? And there are three types of ground reaction forces. There's three ways that you can basically push into the ground, right? You can push lateral, right and left, right? You can push vertical, just straight up and down, or you can go from your heel to your toe, anterior, posterior. Those are the three ways you can push, right? Now, in a lot of sports, like this sport right here, I think it's pretty obvious which ground reaction forces are the most important. What's the most important in sprinting? There's some vertical. What else? There's some heel to toe. Is there a lateral here? Probably not a lot of lateral, right? How about this sport? What's the number one ground reaction force here? Now we're thinking more lateral. You start pushing heel to toe, we're in trouble on this one, right? What if you're like a volleyball blocker? I mean, some sports it's pretty obvious, right? I always like to come back to this. You always think, I go, okay, what about golf? Right? Of those three ground reaction forces, which one do golfers use? Yeah, the answer is yes. They use all of them, right? So we'll get to that. I just want you to know it's just different, right? Like it's not not like other sports. You kind of know it's not really just one plane. Now here's the other thing that's kind of interesting about force plates. All right, what's that right there? What's that point? That's the center of mass or center of gravity of the club. That's where it bounces, right? If I take a force and I apply a force through the center of gravity, what does the club do? This goes straight, right? If you apply force through the center of mass, it just goes straight. I think you already know this, but if I took the pressure and the force and I applied it over here, what's the club going to do now? Now it's going to twist. That creates what's called a torque, right? The good news about force plates is I can see where you're pushing, and I can also calculate how much you're twisting or torquing, right? Depending on where that force comes back into your body. So think about it. If I push straight down into the ground and the force comes straight back to the middle of my body, I'll just jump straight up in the air. That's how I do a vertical jump. But what if I push diagonally? What if I push this way and the force comes back this way, it doesn't go through the center of my body? That'll actually make me twist, right? So we now know that there's 3 ways to twist as well, right? There's this way. I call that twisting, right? And by the way, terminology, can we all agree we should speak 3rd grade? Like we should speak like kindergarten, 3rd grade, I don't care how smart the person is. I don't care which Tyler you're talking to, right? You want to talk like it's 3rd grade, right? So I don't say vertical torque, horizontal torque, sagittal, I don't frontal plane torque, I don't say any of those. I say there's twisting, that's this one. There's this one, I call this rock and rolling. And then there's this one, I call that bending. So you can twist, you can rock, or you can bend. Is that cool? Can we use that language instead? I think your students will appreciate that. Okay, so what's this sport? Primary torque, or that action. That's bend, right? There's bend, right? Got a little rock, a little twist there. A little rock and a little twist, right? This is a very large human right here. By the way, a lot of times they train, I don't know if anybody's done track and field, but they train in wet environment there just to try and get more ground reaction force stuff. There's twist, right? And then I always come back to and I say, okay, so certain sports, it's, well, what about golf? Right, let's go back to golf. So which of these torques do we do in golf? Once again, the answer is yes. So here's the thing I think that's confusing about force plates. In golf, it's like, well, we have all 3 forces and we have all 3 torques, so there's so many things going on, I don't know how to put all this together, right? I think that's one of the confusing parts about it. So I look at Scotty Scheffler, I go, okay, look at his feet, he's moving heel to toe, of course he's moving towards the target, you can tell his feet came off the ground, so he had to have some vertical, right? I mean, you can see all the forces in action, right? You can see the up and down, you can see the A to P, you can see the lateral if you just look at the feet, right? Back in the day, people used to look at Scotty's feet and say, that's crazy. Now everybody's trying to copy this, right? Okay, so here's how I try and make this as easy as possible, right? I feel like we can go on any tool, we can go deep, but before you go deep, you should get superficial first. Let's just get the basics first, and then we figure out how to go deep, right? So this is my scanning process. What's really important here is the scanning sequence. Now this is our sequence. I'm not saying it's the right one, it's just what we've been doing, okay? And you can take this and modify it any way you want. So to me, the first thing is sequence. I always say, okay, imagine you're gonna crack a whip, okay? So imagine you have the handle of the whip and you create this crack of the whip. Do you care how hard they're moving the handle if the tip moves first? Who cares? It's not going to crack anyway. You're out of sequence, right? The handle should go first, and the second part of the whip, and the third, and the fourth. If your sequence is off, I don't even care how hard you push. I feel like sequence is the most important thing here, right? Now, when I say sequence, I'm talking about the sequence of those forces and torques. Now, what I'm going to show you here is 2 sequences. Okay, I call this the 70% rule. If I take, and by the way, we have the largest database of professional golfers on force plates in the world, by far, right? If I take our professional database, this is basically looking at, let's say Korn Ferry, higher. Korn Ferry, Challenge Tour, PGA Tour, DP, Live, right? Take those level players, and LPGA, right? If I take those players and I take 70% of those players, this is the sequence you'll see, right? So 70% of the best players in the world do what I'm about to tell you. What that means is there's 30%, including some major champions, that don't do this. Okay, I just want to make this really clear. This isn't I have to do this to win the Masters. I have Masters champions that don't do this. Okay, but this is what 70% do. All right, here's what 70% of the players do, is this. Get to the top of the backswing. The top of the backswing, the first thing you're going to see is a lateral weight shift, right, on 70% of the players. Now, some people might be like, you know, when you look at golf from afar, if you're not a golf coach, you might be like, hey, we're not stepping, it's not easy, I don't see people shifting weight. for sure, 70% of our players weight shift. Why do they go lateral first? What would be the advantage versus just staying over here? What did Newton tell us? If you push into the ground with 100 pounds, the ground does what? It pushes back with 100 pounds. If you step, you can push harder into the ground. If you push harder into the ground can push back. You got more force you can use. Okay, so a weight shift always increases your force. Okay, so most players go lateral first, not only for sequencing, but for power. Okay, now, second thing you're gonna see, and you've probably seen this with a lot of great players, is they go lateral. The next thing you're gonna see is most great players do this. They shallow early so they can steepen late. They don't steepen early and then try and figure out how to shallow late. Everybody agree with that? That's 70% of our players. So what you're normally gonna see is this, is you're gonna see this lateral motion, then you're gonna see a rock and roll. They rock and roll to shallow the club early. Now the lateral actually helps with the rock and roll as well. Okay? Now once they're here, they gotta get the club in front of them. So now they twist. Remember, twisting brings the club in front of me or behind me. Rock and rolling brings it up and down, right? So I rock and roll first, then I twist, and now I'm gonna bend, stay in my posture, and then jump. And that jump helps release the club, create some more power. That's the 70% rule right there. Now remember there's 3 forces and 3 torques. There's only 5 on here. Everything's in there, these are the major players. Now here's the 98% rule. Okay, here's what, I can show you a couple players that don't do this, but usually, the reason they don't do this is usually those first 2 are at the same time, or the second 2 are at the same time, right? Basically, this is where most players will go lateral, they will twist, and they will jump in that order. Okay, if you don't see that, you're not like 98% of the best players in the world. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple sequences first. This is just how I start. I get somebody on a force plate, we pull up their force plates, and hopefully we're gonna get a bunch of you guys on plates here over the next 2 days. And all I did is I put dots here on lateral, twist, jump. And all I'm looking at is from left to right. When I first do a sequence, I'm looking from left to right, not from bottom up, I'm just looking from left to right, time-wise. Remember, this is your time variable on the bottom, right? So here's the start of the swing, here's address, this line, here's the top, here's impact, here's finish. Those 4 lines, right? So basically, as I'm going here, I'm looking to see what happens first. What happens first on this player? Lateral. What happens next? Twist. What happens next? There's the 98% rule. Is that simple? I just want to know, do you start with the handle of the whip, then go to the second part of the whip, and go to the tip of the whip, or does the tip go first, and then the second, and everything's out of order? That's all I want to know first. Stand up. Everybody stand up. Step inside this player's body. Show me what they do. Go ahead, show me what they do. So what's the first thing they do? What peaks first? Twist. What peaks next? Lateral. What peaks next? Okay, you're starting to step inside their body. Okay, you can sit, right? You with me? Again, don't make this hard. Make this easy. Okay, so the first thing is sequence, right? Remember, I'm trying to step inside their body. I'm trying to step and feel what they feel, right? So the first thing I do is that. Now, second thing I want to do, and I don't want to say we can't dive deeper into sequence, but let's just do the surface first, okay? The next thing is timing. Now, what do I mean by timing? Timing is okay, what if you have the right sequence, but it's in the backswing? Well, I really need this sequence in the downswing, right? I need it to be at the right time. Now, why does timing matter? I can talk about this for days, but let's start with, I want to show you one of the best golf swings on the planet, right? Brace yourself here, okay? So now this is a very old video from an old pressure plate. And what I want to do is this. Everybody see the here at the top? Can you see the mouse going? Yep, okay. There's my center pressure right there, right? Okay, watch the center pressure. By the way, this is my right foot, this is my left foot, right? So I'm facing this way. The center pressure just went to the left. Everybody see that? What did I do? I don't think I did anything. Did I move? Maybe I breathed in a little bit. I don't know. I don't see me moving at all, right? Why am I showing you this? It's because this is Newton's first law. Okay, Newton's first law is objects at rest will remain at rest unless some type of force makes them move, right? I just want you to know, us as humans on the planet Earth, we can't move unless a force makes us move. That's Newton's first law, right? But there's nobody pushing me, is there? Well, there kind of is. It's called the ground, right? It's reacting to what I'm doing, and that force coming back is what makes me move. So here's the weird thing about force plates, is when I create a contraction and push into the ground creates this force that allows me to move. That force I can see before you move. Here's the weird thing about force plates. I see a lot of people looking at force plates and they're like, look what they're doing right now, and they look at the video. And I'm like, dude, that force hasn't happened yet. It's about to happen. It hasn't happened yet. Forces precede motion. This screws people up a lot on force plates, okay? Like you'll see the force move over to the right, and they're like, hey, look, they're moving to the right. I'm like, that doesn't mean they're moving to the right. It means they're applying force on their right foot. They might be about to move left. I see people look at this as weight shift. I'm like, this ain't weight shift. This is where you're pushing, okay? So these forces precede motion. That's really, really important. So what's important to know about this is this. If I apply a force and the ground has to react and this force comes back into me, it takes time for this to happen, right? And what we found is that the best, most powerful players in the world, they do this really early in their swing, so there's time to get the force to their hands to apply it to the club. Now, I always say, listen, there are 3 ways to hit a ball farther, okay? We have an entire track at TPI called our power track, and I can sum it all up like this. There's 3 ways to hit a ball farther. Number 1, apply more force. Okay, get stronger, apply more force to the club. Number 2, move your hands faster, velocity. Power is force times velocity. Apply more force, apply more velocity. So move your hands faster, apply more force. What's the 3rd way? It's called impulse. It's apply that force and velocity for more time. The best example of this is put somebody on a chair with wheels, like 1 foot away from a wall. If I get behind you and I push you into the wall, I could hurt you, but I couldn't kill you. If I started here and that's the wall, and now I could do a running start, I could do a lot more damage. Why? I have more time to apply force and velocity, right? Those are the 3 ways to do this. So think about this. I'm going to create these forces. The whole goal of creating these forces is to get that force up to my hands, to the club, right? The earlier I can do this, I have more time to apply force to the club, right? So I want to create these forces when the club's up here in the air. If I create these forces and the club's down here, I'm pushing 1 foot from the wall. I want to push 30 feet from the wall. Does that make sense? So the earlier you do your ground reaction forces, the earlier I can start applying force to the club. So this is the normal timing of the kinetic sequence. 0.23 seconds. 0.23 seconds before impact is when we see lateral. 0.1 is when we see vertical. So what you'll see is lateral goes first. This is the sequence, right? This is the timing. Now the question is, when is 0.23 seconds? When's 0.1? The most important thing to me is this one right here, the last one. Once you're done doing all your ground reaction forces, now you're transferring it to the club. Now I want to see where are you when you do that last ground reaction force, right? So if I take one of the biggest hitters in the world, Justin James here, right? This is Justin hitting out of the TPI lab, right? And this is his kinetic sequence. How's the sequence? Pretty damn good, right? There's a good kinetic sequence. If I look at the last, here's the last one. Where did his last ground reaction force, vertical, where did it happen? Here's impact. Here's the top of the backswing. Happened somewhere in the middle of the downswing. Right, see that? Somewhere in the middle of the downswing. How about this guy? Notice we just keep getting later and later and later as I go down in power, probably here. He's pushing from 2 inches from the wall, where Justin was 20 feet from the wall. Are you following me on this?